now.
Welcome to the podcast. Ultimate Athlete Concepts here. Joseph Johnson with you again, hosting, and we're going through fringe methodologies in high performance and health that we published. Can we see that there? Yeah, about a year ago. And I'm joined with Jed Smith and Dr. Peter Smolianov, who are kind of guiding us through this section by section. They're learning a lot. So if this piques your interest, you can go on uaconcepts.com. We have the book there to look at, and then also go back and check our previous podcast here, because we're really going over the book really in depth and section by section, so people can get a good grasp of the material and be able to hopefully make better application of it as well. So last week we talked periodization, the cybernetic periodization, classical periodization, and more of a, if you want to say, updated kind of periodization model is a parametric training. And this is getting a little bit of a foothold in the United States. It's definitely not widely known, but you are seeing it in some places. Can you guys talk about that, kind of a little bit of the history and then where it's at right now?
Yeah, Peter is going to be more the expert on that, as he actually witnessed it as an athlete and its evolution, and he's actually tracked it as how it's even being applied here in the United States. So that's a very interesting topic.
So we discussed classical periodization, started by Matveev, cybernetic periodization that is now all around the world, and it is becoming more and more important. I think it's going to be a very hot topic and method because connection to health care is going to be a more vivid from now on, with after the pandemic, where treatment through personalized treatment, particularly through internet and phone and internet technologies became more important. The current parametric training methodology that is available all around the world now can be available through internet. So what you have on the computer is a program that where you enter parameters of your athletes, heart rate, VO2, concentration of lactate and blood, cardiac output, stroke volume. You enter the parameter, the training parameters, the goals, the objective, and the system. What system the computer system does? It takes 40 years worth of data collected on thousands of athletes and uses calculations between specific training variables and changes in athlete condition, and based on the data that you entered, it gives you prescription, training, what to do, how to train. Okay, so this was started in 1968, where some of the first publications on this were done, and analysis started. And Dr. Sergey Gordon and his who was in Moscow working with computer scientists and other sport scientists and then Guy, who is a doctoral student, who brought it to the West and started this in the United States, in Virginia, in Richmond. So he lectures and consults now, but he is providing this parametric training as an alternative to the classical periodization and to other personalized methods of training. This is This is used at least 5 of top 25 American coaches in swimming are using it, and many top cycling, triathlon, and other endurance or cyclical sports are using it. So it is slowly becoming available to all, and this is the future. This is what we hope to discuss more in our future volumes, how this system that is now used by top athletes and top coaches across the world, not only I was talking about top United States but coaches and athletes, but it's now being used across the world in many countries. How this is becoming available to amateur, to recreational users, because this is the next step. And I think the future and what we hope is going to happen is that this parametric training is going to benefit systems of healthcare. Jet mentioned how well integrated training and in healthcare services are at the University of Northern Iowa in the nearby hospital. So this is something that can be used by both medical and athletic performance specialists to benefit both, because all this is about cardiovascular system. Most of it is about endurance through, most importantly, cardiovascular system improvement. And in medicine, this is one of cardiovascular systems is the most important in terms of prevention of critical illnesses and the most important deaths. But this is going to be also beneficial for broader wellness of the community. So in terms of the benefits of it, I don't want to talk much about it because it's a commercial method that you pay quite a lot of money still to use, and to advertise it is not our job. We need to just outline how it works, and this is what we're doing in our book. This is what we're hoping to reveal in our future volumes. We interviewed personally those who developed it. I talked to Sergey Belyaev, and I might be talking more for the future volumes to get more details and make it more useful for amateur athletes and for recreational users. But so far, we think this is the most advanced automated method. Mm-hmm. I think there are many other cybernetic periodization models and methods that might be useful, especially for other sports that are not endurance sports. There are other devices that tailor everyday training to individual needs on the top of classical periodization and log periodization. I think bottom line and the most kind of burning issue is still the coach education. Without a competent coach, it's still very difficult to implement any of these methods and any of these devices, any of these models and any of these services. You still need an expert coach to apply these computer-generated advice, statistical modeling, to apply it together with classical periodization and expert opinion of the coach who puts it all together. So for this, you need a high-performance manager as a coach who can integrate all this into all pillars of high performance. Because psychology is very important in this process as well, as well as your diet and other components of high performance.
Correct, and that's a good segue as far as coaching is concerned into systems of technique, as far as loading, and also, you know, looking at training volumes in maybe less advanced systems using all the parameters that we're discussing in parametric training. It's important to note that our objective, our goal would be to actually set it up that the masses could get, you know, what would be more layman versions that maybe wouldn't cost as much, but we can take those concepts and ideas and apply them, and that'd be the evolution where maybe a simple smartphone, and I know there's a lot of apps out there for doing measuring with athletes, but let's look at best practices and make it simplified for the masses in a high performance model, just like Peter was explaining. And you have all the pillars around the athlete, whether it's nutrition and measuring to help the athlete, whether it's sports psychology, all the way around, and using what is known and best practices in those parameters and bringing it to the masses. That would be the ultimate, because like Peter's saying, we don't want this to sound like a commercial for, you know, one company or something like this. The idea is that people understand this and know that we can apply these things. So, but it's probably a good time to maybe transition into other systems of the world and how they how we've discussed those in the books as well.
Yeah. So in the book, you talk about specifically the Greek model in regards to weightlifting. What are the specifics? What's unique about that?
You know, and the reason we wanted to kind of discuss a few systems in the book is to compare and contrast really polar opposites in the same sport when we're looking at the sport of weightlifting, which we use weightlifting techniques to develop strength and power in most all athletes. So a lot of coaches, strength and conditioning coaches, like to look at those systems of the world in order to get ideas and cherry pick certain concepts to be able to apply. Well, those systems are very different, and the Russian system was very, very advanced as well, which these systems stole and took ideas and concepts and kind of went a different direction from the old Russian system. But I do have
and Bulgarian system as well, which they you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Which in some ways competed with Russian and other Eastern European systems. Yeah.
And the
Bulgarians per capita were much more efficient.
Well, I can tell you the Chinese system is closer to the Russian system, and the Greek system is closer to the Bulgarian system. So the Chinese system is more of an evolved, you know, older Russian system, and then again the Greek system is really close to the Bulgarian.
You mean mostly in being very high volume, as opposed to being more Chinese and Russian being more high volume and going a bit overboard with on
exercise selection, yeah.
On the initial stages of periodization, being risking to overload athletes, whereas Greek and Bulgarian model maybe was a little bit less brutal in terms of just there are no less of huge volumes in the beginning of your on preparational stages, right?
Yeah, and in fact, both the Chinese and Russian system had, multiple exercises that they had prescribed through different stages, many, like overboard, hundreds and hundreds of exercises. And when you go to the Chinese training halls at the young ages, you see them doing multiple exercises, where the Bulgarians had about 8 exercises that they prescribed over and over again, and they worked on more specificity of the movement. And then the Greeks came down to 6. They narrowed it down. Christos Yakovu took Ivan Abadjeyev's system and narrowed it down to just 6 movements, and just tweaked it and kind of brought it to another level. With less volume than the Bulgarian system, and had the successes there. The one thing I will say that I do want to point out, there was a system in the world that was the best for many years before the Soviet system took over, and that was the United States system. they dominated up, with Bob Hoffman, all the way up, through the late 1950s, and then the Soviets kind of took over. There's an interesting historical component. Is Tommy Kono, the greatest American weightlifter? This is a great story. He and I interviewed him on a few occasions out in Hawaii, which he passed maybe a year or so ago, Tommy Kono, but. He explained to me, this is very interesting, that when he was the best weightlifter in the entire world, he got a telegram from the Soviet Union, and he was a poor athlete living in Hawaii because they were amateur athletes, and the Soviet Union said that they would buy his flight. This is the middle of the Cold War, and they'd fly him, and this was sometime, I have it written down in my notes, in the late 50s, mid to late 50s. They'd fly him out to Russia, and they brought him out, and he flew into Moscow, and then they took him on a train up into northern Russia to a training base. And they had he explained to me, because like I said, he was poor. This would be espionage. He couldn't have done this. He was the best lifter in America in the middle of the Cold War, and he went out. Nobody knew, and he spent a lot of time over there. Like it was like 2 or 3 weeks. And when he got into the training base, they had pictures all over the building that were life size, and every little phase of the lift, all around the room. He said you'd walk, it was a giant gymnasium, and there were pictures of him doing a clean and jerk and a snatch, clean and press. And he's like, how did you get this? How did you get these pictures? And then they showed him this machine that he remembered, the machine in the world championships, which it was like a big wooden box. And he said every time he would lift, they would turn this machine on. It was loud, but only when he lifted, okay? Because he lifted different than everybody in the world. And what it was the first super slow-mo camera, and it was the size of one of the old phonographs, big old record players, and they were filming him, and they broke down all of his technique before he even got out there. And Tommy Kono worked on training himself in Hawaii, and came up with all of the movements to revolutionize lifting. Before people were doing split snatches and split cleans, and he was doing the squat and the biomechanics of his back and his back positioning. They loved it, so they wanted to know the drills he did in order to develop that. and he just shared with them and gave them everything. And they started revising the technique based on Tommy Kono's movements. And I thought that was very interesting because we also had out here at University of Northern Iowa back in, I think, 2006, we brought out for a couple weeks Qinghui Zhao, who was the founder in the 1950s of the Chinese weightlifting system. So we had him in town. We studied the Chinese system from the founder, and then I went multiple trips out to China. So at dinner with Qinghui Zhao, he explained to me that the entire Chinese weightlifting system, their techniques, they never brought Tommy Kono in to study him. He goes, I was an avid photographer, and I would always take pictures. He was the best lifter in the world of his movements. And he goes, I started developing training drills to mimic his movements. And so our goal was to mimic Tommy Kono, the best lifter in the world, in his positions. So the Chinese system and the Russian system, they got the biomechanics from who they both felt was the best mechanical lifter in the world, Tommy Kono. So I think that's just a great little story about where the technique came from. And then Christos Iakovou, the basically the godfather of the Greek system, he looked at Alexiev, Vasily Alexiev's technique to come up. And you remember that, Peter, talking to Christos? Alexiev was the model of what they felt the positions should be as far as the lifts.
Yeah. And there is a very interesting relation to health from Alexeyev, that when we were partying after the conference with Christos, he gave us quite a lot of personal additional information that was kept secret. Much of what we're saying here was a state secret. This parametric training was a state secret. And what Alex was doing was also closed. So we didn't know that Alex went through all his victories and most of his later career with great back pain. And he would start every training session with more therapeutic exercises that
Yeah, I thought that was very interesting. They started, and that's when we have a little bit of feedback. Should we just pause a little bit? There's some good stuff. We'll just pause here. Yeah. So. Gosh, I hate that.
Yeah, and I don't get as much of it as you guys are getting. Like like 95% has come through real clear. I get a little every now and then, a little something, but I don't think I've noticed as much as you guys have.
So it's interesting how he was developing methods that are used now in clinical settings to treat patients with serious back injuries and spine-related damages. He was doing quite a lot of strengthening while spreading, and also using lifting weights in water. This is something still fringe. He was doing decades ago. We are now start doing this. So Jed, I hope your efforts will experiment with this. But it was.
So Joseph, I don't know if you caught that, or are you getting the feedback, Joseph?
I got a little bit at the end there, yeah.
Okay, so they had Alexiev lifting in water. So you take barbell sets,
yeah,
and squatting, and front squatting, back squatting, cleaning, snatching, all the movements with the hydrostatic pressure on the joints, even in movement like we were talking about, Christos said, even in the river. So there was actual,
Current.
the current that's pushing and moving the body where they're trying to do the lift.
Yeah.
And an interesting thing was also that Christos shared with us that every day Alexeyev would start a practice with these therapeutic exercises before he would do his specialized lifts. He would do back extension for tens of sets. He would do hundreds of repetitions, high volume of exercises that are just to strengthen lower back in particular, laying down and leaning forward and raising your body up. So training those long back muscles the way we do them for therapeutical reasons now. So
yeah, to keep him, because obviously the weight he was lifting, and a lot of it was experimental on how they pushed him through his career to become the greatest lifter, and he was dealing with a lot of pain. They started prescribing a ton of back extensions for him to even be able to do the training and compete at the level that he did, just because he was dealing with so much pain, and that alleviated the pain, the back extensions, which is interesting when you look at some of the fringe workouts that from the Deacle Spine Institute that we've incorporated. That's a big part of it, and we've applied those into training with our athletes as well. So, yeah, go ahead, Yossi.
One of the things that resonated with me when you're talking about them recruiting an American athlete and kind of knowing a lot about him. I know that one of the things that I had learned about the Russians a long time ago was that they probably knew more about our athletes than we did. So it was funny that they researched us to the nth degree. They knew everything about us, studying each athlete, his peculiarities, the details in his technique. They could describe technique of one of our athletes better than our coaches could at that time. And they were really it was interesting. I know that every time Dr. Yessis went over to Russia, he said he was always amazed at how much they knew about us and how little we knew about them. We didn't know anything about them, and we didn't even care. And they were way ahead of us, but they were also very knowledgeable about us.
Yeah, hence the Tommy Kono story. Nobody cared that he flew over there.
Yeah, nobody cared, and if they knew, they weren't worried about it. Which is kind of ironic, right?
Yeah.
It's just kind of a funny scenario that that's how far behind we've been, is that we didn't notice, nor did we care.
And also, it is a great example of the fringe methodology of espionage.
Yeah.
Now being a standard requirement for a winning national team. Whether you take Canadian success or French success, they have special units that are called either espionage or top secret winning project. And what they do is they spy on opponents.
Yeah.
And it's so one of the requirements that one of my responsibilities in Australia was to compile a database on opponents in order to understand their best practices, strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, isn't that something? It's required in order to compete at the highest levels now. But yeah, those are examples of it starting back in the 1950s. And why not? Let's send the guy a telegram and see if he wants to make some money. They're not paying him anything as an amateur. We can pay him, and they flew him
Yeah.
over.
Well, they had no, they had
Actually,
no shame to their game. That was for sure.
I think it's simply an indication of the professionalism of the system. Once you reach certain level of professionalism, you must do it if you want to if you want to win.
Yeah, yeah. It was win at all costs. There was no question about it. That was the mantra that was followed, and they certainly. No, I mean, you can't deny the success. They, they thrashed us for a long time, and that was the biggest reason why, was because of the disposition towards it was to win only, and that's it. Like, I remember talking with a few of the Soviet coaches, because a lot of people would blame or attribute Soviet success to steroids and the use of them and everything else. And it when I talk to the Soviet coaches about them, they're just matter of fact. I remember asking Dr. Bondarchuk, I asked him, I said, well, how much with the use of anabolic steroids, I said, how much do they matter for your throwers? And he said 3 meters. Exactly. He said, that's what they give you, 3 meters. So if you're not within 3 meters of winning, don't bother. Basically was the idea. But it was interesting though, it was quantifiable, matter of fact. It wasn't, like in the United States, it's something totally different. It's become a culture. But for the Soviets had narrowed down exactly how that was going to affect the athlete and what benefit it would give him, and that was it. And there was no it was not a moral dilemma or any of that. It was just matter of fact. It was business.
I think it's also responsibility for the athlete was also at a different level, and instead of putting the responsibility on the shoulder of the athlete, coaches and doctors shared that responsibility and help the athletes to withdraw and stay as healthy as possible, accepting the fact that without this you cannot win, and I think that's moral dilemma. But the weightlifters from different countries that we talked to, me and Jet, you can say if it's not true, but they said it has been just a matter of amount of steroids that
You're exactly right.
That they had been taking. Now, of course, there are much more advanced methods, including genetic and
sure. It was the thing is I think that was interesting to me is that in America, we're very hypocritical. We tried to act like we were on the moral high ground, but the fact was everybody on most of the people on the Olympic team were using something in some form or another. And I think the thing that the Russians looked at it as a tool in the toolbox, and that was it, nothing else. And a recognition that the rest of the world was doing it too. It's not question. There's no, I don't think that's even a debate. I like the fact that the Russians looked at it as a tool and a measurable, quantifiable tool, and said this is what it is, and that's what it'll do. And if you're not in the range of winning, with the use of those, then don't bother with them.
And that's
it only makes sense.
And that's why you need to take training systems and protocols with a grain of salt, because realize that a lot of these elite systems, and I'm coaching collegiate athletes, if you take it and apply it verbatim exactly, you might not get the same results. So you need to understand kind of the principles and concepts that they're using, and you can experiment as far as their loading and whatnot, and maybe you you pull back a little bit as much as the volumes, because again, realize that you don't know what pharmacology is being applied, so you have to logically think about pulling back. Our athletes are getting drug tested, and that's, which is a good thing. So I've applied these different methods as a strength and conditioning coach. Some of the periodization schemes are interesting to take a look at. The Chinese, they use closer to a classical periodization model, where they would but they have a different periodization scheme for women and a different one for men because of the women's hormonal cycle. So women, they have train at 3 weeks progressive overload and about 10 days off. Okay. And that, so roughly 1 month. And with the philosophy that if you take a group of female athletes, they'll all get on the same hormonal cycle and it'll optimize.
Yeah.
So their plan is, 3 weeks, push, 10 days, 3 weeks, 10 days. And which is an interesting look at it. For males, they go 14 days on and 7 days off. So they push for 14, 7 down. And it's just that pattern, 14, 14, 7. The Greeks, completely different. The Chinese are using more of a percentage-based model with, like I said, sex differences in how they cycle it. But the Greeks, they literally are looking at more of a Bulgarian approach, where it's maximal training resistance. And they actually, every single day, every single training session, they'll go to the PR, try to break a PR. So it's they'll go 3 weeks loading, always pushing to try to break their PR, and then they'll do drop sets or drop cycle. If they miss, they go down, then they work up, try to hit it again, and PR, go down. They get 2 drop cycles per workout. But the goal is always to PR for a 3-week period, and then they deload for 1 week, go back on. They'll go 7 months training like that, where 3 straight weeks, every single workout, you're trying to get a new maximum effort. Every single workout, 3 weeks, 7 days, 3 weeks, 7 days, 7 months. Very interesting. And they're completely different in their approaches, where you'll go through different training zones in the Chinese system of intensities. And the Greeks are they work on technique when they're young, master the technique. And then when they get to, and the volume is very low, because they get to their heaviest weight as quickly as possible in multiple sessions in a day, bang. And they keep the volume very low. They play with intensity. So it's very, very contradicting styles.
And if I remember correctly, I think with Ivan Abadiev using like three training sessions a day, morning, afternoon, and then early evening, I believe. Is that correct?
And the Christos is actually going to use roughly about the same,
Okay.
but and maybe more if need be. But they're only half-hour workouts, just a 30-minute workout, and they again, they keep the volume very low, and it just boom, it hit the intensities, and plenty of rest in between. I
think what Christos was telling us is that he's been trying to stretch the training for the whole day and maximize resting periods that include not just walking around, but walking outside, having snacks, having coffee, and then returning to short periods of training. This is in line with our previous discussion the most optimal daily periodization that
Exactly.
include for everybody, not just for high performance athletes, but for everybody. Must include at least 3, but if possible, perhaps even more sessions of activity, active, intense training. And again, we want to relate what we learn from Greeks quite a lot, because they have very nurturing, very humanistic system of developing high performance athletes. They do not have the Chinese luxury of, well, for coaches and administrators, of numbers in the first place.
Yeah.
And the system that is based on very high rewards as opposed to quite, if not deprived, then lacking resources for many thousands of potential athletes who would train very hard just to stay in the system and receive the rewards. In Greece, you don't have that motivation. So you need to be very, very careful about retention.
Yeah.
And these systems that they developed must be used for health of amateur athletes. So what we learn from them should be in recreation.
The one thing I want to add, Peter, is Christos's athletes. If you compare the Greek system to other systems of the world, he had the most athletes that went to multiple Olympic games in the sport of weightlifting. So 4 Olympic games, that's very difficult in the sport of weightlifting, but the longevity, he had much more longevity with his athletes than other systems. And I think that you can make the correlation of what Peter was saying of, as they became more elite, spreading it out, multiple exercise, restorative exercise, recovery exercise, and then going for, like he said, for coffee with the coaches, and then breaking down technically, psychologically, trying to make sure that, and then the other thing he did is they'd do 7 months of training, and the other 5 months with the elite athletes, they were all on their own, meaning you're a professional. I want you for 7 months of the year. The other 5 months is your off season, but you're a professional. You train yourself during this time. They had an autonomy. And so much different than like Chinese, where everything is controlled, because this is the way he would keep these athletes, because he has a small population, very small population. You have a quarter of the world in China, so they have much more of a recruiting pool. He didn't have that luxury. So these athletes don't get burnt out. They get to they live in a different culture. They can go with their families. But he said they are responsible for staying in shape and training on their own, because by the time they become professional level, they should know what to do. And so when you check in, you should be in shape. So that was how he ran it. Obviously when you're younger, you need more structure, but as they got older, they released some of those restraints.
Could you this is just something I had read, like, I don't know, maybe 7, 8, 9 years ago, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal or New York Times. One of the reporters there interviewed Ivan through an interpreter, and I can't remember his name now. One of his previous athletes, I think his name was Alex, who moved to the Bay Area, and they had developed a gym there that when Ivan moved over, and I can't think of his name right now. But anyway, the story was that Ivan advocated junk food all day long for his athletes in between the lifts. as I guess as a way. My guess is to activate the adrenals with lots of because they thought, well, he must advocate a real super healthy diet, and he said, in fact, he didn't. Not all the time. He would advocate sugary, caffeinated, drinks and foods to get kind of. From my presumption was to get the adrenals pushed. Did you guys ever encounter that?
I'm not. That's Abajev in the Bulgarian system.
Yeah.
Peter, do you know anything on that? Did you ever hear?
I can tell you one thing that coaches do is they tell this to get everyone else.
That also sounds familiar to me. I've heard that with other things.
It may happen periodically to jazz it up, but I have. I don't think I doubt it's such a regular.
Yeah, I can tell you a funny story that relates to that, Peter. Antonio Krastev, who came to Minnesota in the 1990s to our weightlifting gym in Minneapolis, and Krastev had snatched the most. It still holds the most that anyone's ever snatched in the history of the world. In training, he snatched 220 kilos. In competition, I believe it was 217 kilos. But Krastev moved to the United States because Ken Patera, who was an American weightlifter in the 1970s, who actually went against Alexiev in 1972 Olympics. He was beat by Alexiev, but he was our heavyweight. Ken Patera was in the AWA. He owned it. He was a professional wrestling federation. And Krastev moved here, the strongest man in the world, to get into pro wrestling. So he was coming and training in our gym, and everyone, they were afraid to go and talk to Krastev because Krastev was intimidating, and they wanted to find out, well, what does Krastev do? What do the Bulgarians do? So people are taking notes when he's just exercising and working out. So, but nobody would ask him anything, and it was, again, espionage, and he thought it was funny. So sometimes he would make up exercises, right? And like Peter's saying, like Abajev maybe say, oh yeah, we feed them all junk food and sugar and soda pop and this and that. So Krastev was doing a snatch from a chair, just sitting in a chair and doing a snatch, right? And then people started copying, practicing like this is what you need to do, and he'd laugh about it. Like, I made this exercise up.
Yeah, that resonates. I know some of these guys were a little slippery. I had that a couple of times where I encountered it, where they presume I had a couple of times where they presume maybe I didn't know very much, so they could tell me anything. And it just so happened that
not only from time to time, but you might use sugar and coffee for very specific reasons to stimulate. So it's
for maximal lifts. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
If you're having to, and the adrenals are being, really pushed. By the way, I just looked that article up. It was in 2011 in the Wall Street Journal. You guys can look it up. It says he prescribed candy in between workouts, which, it does make some sense. I mean, I get it in certain situations. Yeah, it does. I mean, it couldn't be a steady diet. That couldn't be your overall diet, but I could see.
And psychologically, there could be an effect as well for an athlete, their favorite candy that, who knows? I mean,
it makes me feel better. I'm not mad. So anyway, well, I appreciate you guys going over this stuff. It's interesting to see how these models are being used in slightly different ways, because definitely the Bulgarian system was undoubtedly successful. Per capita, they were the best probably in the world. They ended up turning it around on the Russians and beating them at different times. And so that's kind of an interesting idea. And then the way that the Chinese have picked up with what the former Soviet Union was using as well. Fascinating on both ends that it's going, they're different approaches, but very successful nonetheless. So I look forward to we're going to get together again next week and go over some of the next steps in the book. But I appreciate you guys taking the time today to do this with me. Very interesting for me as well.
Well, thank you, Joseph. Thanks,
Thank
Peter.
you, Joseph. Thank you, Jeff.
Yep.
Thank you,
Bye.
Peter. You guys have a great night. Thank you.